Energy Magic of the Vampire. Secret Techniques for Personal Power and Manifestation by Webb. So I'm excited about chatting about this book, and depending on when you're watching it, Don will be on the show this Thursday, so we can actually dive deeper into some of the subjects in this book. One of the reasons I enjoy this is, I've had a discussion with Indy Blackwood on the channel beforehand, or before this, and we've spoken about his book and his material and his approach to vampirism, and that's slightly different. There are many overlapping ideas that you'll find that correspond, especially around the principles of energy, but the methodologies around gathering energy, how it's utilized, views on the astral, these are from two very different states, and from two very different lineages, where Blackwood traces his work pretty much down to the order of the Dracul, and specifically Sigismund of Luxembourg, and how that connects. The work from Don in this one connects directly in the Sethian current, as it is taught in the temple, or the order of the vampire inside of the Temple of Set. Don being a former high priest of the Temple of Set, and a prolific writer both in the areas of fantasy as well as in occult sciences, specifically catered towards the left-hand path given his background. So the book I find to be an exquisite piece. Not only is it, as you can see, Don's very well respected and connected by many other authors, including some of my personal favorites, the forwards by Thomas Carlson, Mark Stavish, who have both been on the show, Michael W. Ford, who hopefully will pop on with us soon, Frater UD, and Reverend Denise Dunmar. So I'm not very familiar with Denise's work, but I am very familiar with all the others, and I think most of you are as well. This book has got a nice kind of breakdown in terms of its collection. I'd like to just start with this. Now, if you tune into the episode, the interview, we'll actually go into this a little bit. A special thanks to Lilith Aquino, obviously Dr. Michael Aquino's partner, who was the Grand Master of, who invited Don and pretty much inferred to him the position of Master inside of the Order, who he worked with in helping her to find her own word. Now, we'll talk about the word more in detail inside of the actual interview. But the book itself is broken down into a couple of major sections. Now, one of the things I just want to kind of highlight is his component here, which is also the difference. The book is not about blood fetishism. Blood magic is not part of vampirism. In fact, he highlights that blood, and this is again from the Sethian perspective, there is no blood. There's no utilization of blood. These are simply utilized as metaphors. Energy is essentially the focus principle here. But the beauty about the book is how this is utilized, because he breaks out that frame from the typical ritual format, and it's very much for the modern adept and the modern seeker, because it explores even how that paradigm is used across concepts like social media, influence, how energy, what the energy currency really is in life, and not only how to gather it, gain it, but how to store it, how to utilize it, invest it in other areas, which is very, very useful, and really makes us aware of a lot of unconscious psychic patterns that we may be engaged in that affects our life. So the first book is called Vampire Theory and Practice. This is really the psychology part, the theory, the philosophy, how it's seen in the Order, and it looks at some of the basic practice, really helping you understand what he means by vampire. You'll see the note of vampire spelled here with a Y. That as Don is not only a teacher of writing, but a very, as I mentioned, prolific writer himself and a lover of all things literature. He stems this from an old novel, one of the earlier novels on the concept of the vampire, and that's where that spelling really stems from. And this he also explores in the interview, but then moves into also the fundamentals. What is energy? How does it work? The vampire kind of psychology here explained in its stages of development. Magic, and a proper definition and a practical method for magic of how it should be applied and how it should be tested. For the critical thinker, this is a great choice. Whereas the more magical thinker, you probably do better with indies work, but with someone with a critical approach and a rational approach more to their magic, this is an absolutely exquisite piece of work. Breaking down the brainy stuff, so as he mentioned it, really breaking down the brain anatomy and what that kind of means and why that's important. And not just from the physical base of the brain, but the left, right hemispheres, the pituitary and the gastrointestinal brain, and the role that they all have in this energy production and energy utilization process. So it goes in quite detail with a number of different facets. Then we come to the vampiric initiation, and these are almost like these stages of grand progression, and they're very practical. They're not just theoretical. He gives full ritual exercises and practices along with the analysis and the philosophy, and what he's really doing here is exploring various key contributors to the occult arts throughout history, starting everywhere from Pascal Randolph and his work in sex magic and breaking down his principles, and then providing rituals for the magician to come into space with that himself, or attuned to that, so we say, frequency or identity or stage of development. Then Thelema, Aleister Crowley, Indulgence with Anton LaVey, Runa with Stephen Flowers. And by the way, do tune in for the interview. He shares some very interesting stories of how Stephen actually got his word and the process, as well as how Lilith got her arctay, and the role Stephen and Don had inside of that process as she reached the next stage of her work. Looking at Zephyr, obviously Aquino's work, and so on and thus forth. Very nice process. We'll look at that in a moment. One of the things that I like about his structure of ritual processes, they're not theoretical in as many others are. You find a lot of authors that will write things and they're more like mental thought forms that haven't been fully expressed. It's not the case with Don. They're very practical. It's work that he's done. Where it isn't, he references who has done it and why, what his experiences are in it. So from there on into the actual advanced practices, and this has a nice kind of frame where it looks at a lot of different practices and processes, let's just turning in the vampire, and repatterns or reframes that in the modern context, which makes it very practical and valuable, and also goes into a lot of other areas, from everything we're dealing with our finances to relationships and so on and thus forth. Then the Vampire Miscellaneous, this is the nice to have section, if you will, so to speak. FAQ on all the other stuff, vampiric presets, what are those principles, a good curriculum of reading with additional areas, some superstition, additional works, and of fiction, as well as other things that the vampire adept can study. This is a very nice kind of procession for the seeker, specifically someone that has a more Sethian based approach inside of their work. I think I personally had quite a deep love for. I found reading this was quite a nice balance from some of the other works that I've read on the subject. And again, he's just a very articulate writer, extremely well grounded in his approach, because he really cuts through all the rubbish and makes things rational. So for the rational seeker, you'll find a lot of value inside of this one. Again, we can see the breakdown of principles. If we look even in the different stages of the words, we see the description. Let's just kind of have a quick look at one of those. So there we have the Rite of Arcte. These are rituals of opening into the current, as we see each of them. And they're very detailed. Even his analysis of each of the characters, we have a nice breakdown of the individual and their work, a little bit of their behind their arguments as well. So why did Pascal create a lot of those claims that he did, but paints the picture of the time period. Then breaks down his practice as well a little bit more. So you can see here breaking it down into the Valentia, Discretism, and Posism, but then explains what those are, how those fit in, and then leads it into a bit of a practical kind of use case, as well as an analysis based upon your perspective, how those regions of the brain are impacting it. So it's a very self-reflective, progressive manual, and makes it just like that. It is both a working magical text, so to speak, as well as a great personal development text in that sense. So for research and reference, definitely a good quality book to have. Very well put together. Very much enjoyed. And if you're looking for something a little bit more specific and detailed of the person, do tune into the interview with Don this Thursday, where we explore some of these ideas in more detail.